Hello, my friend. So you have your DJI Osmo action camera and you want to get some footage on your motorcycle. Since you're probably not bringing a laptop to review the footage, what you get is what you get. So it better be right the first time. And this is what happened to me. Lots of unexpected jitters. Although I've experienced the jitters before, I thought maybe it was due to mounting the camera on the motorcycle. And some test footage on the street made it appear as though body-mounted footage would make it better. Clearly not so. First, let me start by saying the first rule of creativity is that there are no rules to creativity. Don't paint yourself into a corner because someone convinced you that there's something you should do. Experiment as much as possible and find whatever looks good to you. With that said, I'm sure you've come across the advice for cinematic settings on your action camera, specifically in setting your shutter speed at twice your frame rate. For example, if your shutter speed is 24 frames per second, then shoot for a shutter speed of 1/50. This advice gives you motion blur that best matches what your eyes, your human eyes, actually perceive in the real world. Keep in mind that this is a stylistic choice more than a rule. I've been trying to shoot on the DJI Osmo Action 4 using ND filters at 24 frames per second with a 1/50 shutter speed quite unsuccessfully. After not finding anything but recommendations in favor of NDs combined with the frame rate at half the shutter speed on a motorbike, I tried some comparisons of my own. Initially believing the jitters would be solved by going back to auto exposure settings, but this is what I found. So here to start out, we have the traditional recommendation of the shutter speed at twice the frame rate, and you can see right from the get-go, we get the same jitters that we saw earlier in this video, something that's just not usable, and that has been my experience. What we go into next is 24 frames per second with the auto exposure and the 32 ND filter, and we're still getting the jitters as we go along the trail. Not much different than the traditional recommendation for frame rate and shutter speed. Here we go into 60 frames per second. This is again auto exposure, 32 ND, and it's a little bit better, but we're still seeing the jitters. If you look off to the right in the shrubs, just not quite what we want to see in this type of image. Now we go into 60 frames per second auto exposure with no ND, and we've lost the jitters. We're back to what we'd expect from an action camera, giving us action with no shakes, the stabilization working as advertised. And here we drop back down to 24 frames per second, auto exposure, no NDs, and again, we're looking as expected for the DJI Osmo Action 4. So to take this into a real-world experience, we'll get on the road with the Osmo Action 4, rock steady engaged, and we have the head mount for the camera. We're at 60 frames per second. We're working in auto exposure, and I dropped the exposure value down in the camera to 0.7, negative 0.7, just because I feel like the action camera often overexposes the sky, and this way we're making sure the sky is not overexposed. We'll start off in D-Log M. Here we'll add a color correction. We'll add a little bit of a grade. And to make things maybe even a little bit more interesting, I've got the Pixel Film Studio's Final Cut Pro Motion Blur tool, and we'll add that right now and see if it just gives us an added touch of motion blur. And we'll up the sound, and this is what we get. And I honestly don't think that this is too bad, considering we are in auto exposure and we certainly don't have the jitters. And finally, we'll try it again in 24 frames per second, which I like the best. This is all the same settings as with the 60 frames per second. Here we'll see it in D-Log M. We'll add a little color correction. We'll add a little color grade. And then we'll add in the Pixel Film Studio's motion blur tool to top it off. And then up the sound a little bit. And I think this is looking pretty good. I'm not embarrassed of this footage, and certainly we've lost the jitters. So, for me, I'm ditching the NDs for the action camera on the motorbike. I just can't accept any more jittery footage, and I honestly think I've landed on a visually acceptable and, equally important, a reliable solution between no NDs, auto exposure on the action camera, and Pixel Film Studio's free Final Cut Pro motion blur tool. I'm not affiliated with Pixel Film Studios. This is not a promotion, and I'll drop a link to their tool in the description below. What do you think? Any thoughts or suggestions? Drop a comment below. I always appreciate new subscribers. Like this video if you feel so inclined. And as always, crush your ego, inflate yourself, follow your intuition, and find your everyday.